Utah woman has been sentenced to life without parole for the murder of her husband. Kouri Richins published a children's book about grief after her husband's death. While promoting the book in 2023, she was arrested. She was convicted of murder this past March. Prosecutors say she laced her husband's cocktail with 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl after trying and failing to poison him weeks earlier with a fentanyl-laced sandwich. They also say she had secretly taken out a number of life insurance policies against him.
It is May 13th, 2026. And if things had gone differently, if one woman had made different choices, or perhaps if the people around her had seen through the ones she made, today would be a birthday. Eric Richins would have turned 44. There might have been cake. There would certainly have been his boys, 3 of them, loud and alive and running through whatever space their father had built for them in the mountains of Summit County, Utah. But Eric Richins has been dead for 4 years. And today, on the day he would have turned 44, a judge in a Utah courtroom looked at the woman who killed him, the woman who was supposed to love him, and handed down a sentence. Life without the possibility of parole. 5 words, 12 syllables, the rest of her life. Take a moment with that, because before we get to how we got here, before we walk you through the crime, the courtroom, the 5 hours of testimony that preceded those words, we want you to sit with the sentence itself. Life without parole. Not because you don't already know what she did. You do. Most of you came to this documentary because you already followed this case. You know about the fentanyl. You know about the children's book. You know about the morning shows and the grief she performed for cameras, while investigators were already circling. You know what she did. What we are here to tell you, what we are going to spend the next 20 minutes walking through in detail, is what happens next, what it actually means. Not just the sentence as a legal outcome, but the life that sentence produces. The daily, specific, irreversible reality of where Kouri Richins is going and what she will find when she gets there. Because here is something worth knowing before we go any further. The night after Eric Richins died, the very night after, Kouri Richins sat down and searched for women's prisons in Utah. She found one. She researched it. She, being the meticulous planner that she was, apparently factored it into whatever calculations she was making about her future. That prison closed 4 months after she killed him. The facility she is walking into now, the one she will spend the rest of her life inside, is a $1 billion institution she never saw coming, never researched, never planned for. She thought she knew what prison would be like. She had no idea. Eric Richins was not a headline. Before he became one, he was a husband and a father and a man who coached youth football in the valleys of Summit County. He was the kind of man whose teammates still break huddles in his name. His sisters will tell you about the off-road trips, about the way he moved through a room, about the specific texture of what it felt like to be loved by him. Hold on to that. Because this case has produced so much coverage of what was done to him that it is easy to lose sight of who was lost. And who was lost matters. It is the only thing that matters. By the time March 3rd, 2022 arrived, the marriage was already a financial wreck. Kouri had been quietly draining accounts, taking loans she hid from Eric, building a debt that investigators would later calculate in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was an affair. There were life insurance policies, multiple, that she had taken out on Eric without his full understanding of their scope, and there had been Valentine's Day. A little over 2 weeks earlier, Eric had become violently ill after eating food she prepared. Violently ill in a way that, in retrospect, was not random. He knew something was wrong. The people who loved him knew something was wrong. They begged him to leave. He didn't leave. He stayed because leaving meant leaving his boys in her custody alone, and that was something he would not do. So he stayed. And on the night of March 3rd, 2022, Eric Richins went to bed in the home he shared with his wife and his 3 sons in Francis, Utah, and he did not wake up. His boys found him. Before that, in the hours before anyone called 911, 2 of his sons stood in the hallway outside the locked bedroom door. The television inside was running at full volume. They knocked. They called for him. The door stayed closed. And on the other side of it, their father was dying with 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his bloodstream. A 39-year-old man, healthy, active, dead before morning. Let that image sit. 2 boys in a hallway, a locked door, a television turned up loud. That is the crime stripped of every legal term, every financial thread, every piece of evidence. That is what was done. And if you have followed this case from the beginning, you already knew the mechanics of it. But sometimes you need to be brought back to the hallway, back to the boys, back to the specific human cost of what one person decided to do for money and for freedom from a life she no longer wanted. That is where we begin. The sentencing hearing on May 13th lasted nearly 5 hours. 5 hours is a long time to sit in a courtroom and reckon with what one person has cost the people around them. And the people around Eric Richins used every minute of it. His family came prepared. His sisters spoke. His friends spoke. And his sons, Carter, Ashton, and Weston, had written statements that were read aloud by their therapists because the boys themselves were not made to stand in front of her. Before any of that, though, early in the proceedings, there was one moment worth naming specifically. Kouri Richins cried, not when her son's words were read, not when the judge spoke. She cried when her mother's letter was read. She cried when her brother said he missed her. She reached for grief when the loss being described was her own. Watch for that contrast as the hearing unfolds, because it is the most honest thing she did all day. Now Eric's sister Amy. She disclosed something in that courtroom that had never appeared publicly before. Amy had suffered a miscarriage, twins, the loss of a pregnancy that no police report captured, no trial exhibit cataloged, no sentencing memorandum footnoted. It appeared once quietly on what would have been Eric's 44th birthday inside a courtroom in Summit County. For many of you watching this, that will be new information. It was new to the room. It expanded in a single sentence the scope of what this crime cost, beyond anything a case file can contain. Katie, Eric's sister, spoke about something called the Walk the Dog letter, a letter Kouri had written in which she named Katie's daughters, both of them, both under 10 years old. The letter framed itself around an innocent errand. The implication underneath it was not innocent at all. Katie stood in that courtroom and named what it meant to find your children's names in a document written by a woman already facing murder charges. Then the judge turned to Kouri Richins and gave her time to speak. She used 48 minutes of it. 48 minutes she denied. She implied fault in others. And most revealing of all, she invoked Eric. She used his name, the name of the man she killed, to undermine the credibility of the very people now raising his sons. Think about that choice. In the room where his family was grieving him in public, where his boys' words were still settling over the gallery, she reached for his name as a tool. That tells you everything the 48 minutes needed to tell you. Then the judge spoke. Judge Morrissey had listened to all of it, the family, the statements, the 48-minute address, and when he spoke, he was precise. A person who attempts a murder refines the method, completes it, and then constructs a false alibi using her own children as cover is not a person who can be released back into the world. That was his reasoning, not fury, not performance, logic. The kind of logic that ends with a gavel. Life without parole. The gavel came down. Here is the thing about Kouri Richins that separates her from most people who end up sentenced to life in prison. She planned for this. Not for the conviction, she planned against that, and she lost, but for the possibility. The night after Eric died, she sat down and searched for women's prisons in Utah. She found the Draper facility. She researched what it looked like, how it operated, what life inside it produced. She is, by every account, a woman who calculates, who prepares, who builds a version of the future in her mind, and then works backward from it. The Draper prison closed in July 2022, 4 months after she killed him. While Kouri Richins was still appearing on morning television, still promoting the children's book she had written, a grief memoir, sold to parents to help children process loss. While hosts called her a grieving mother and she smiled for cameras, a demolition crew was dismantling the prison she had planned for. The institution she had researched, the one she had quietly folded into her contingencies, was being torn down. The $1 billion Utah State Correctional Facility that replaced it opened while she was still in county custody. She never looked it up. She never had to rethink her calculations, because by that point she was performing innocence full-time, and performing innocence does not leave room for updating your contingency plans. Everything she built fell short of the version of reality she was walking into. The insurance money frozen. The civil cases she filed against Katie, attempting to access what Eric had placed in trust for his sons, unresolved. The book pulled. The planned sequel project, the bigger platform she had spoken about privately, gone. And the prison she researched the night her husband's body was still warm. Gone too. She thought she knew what was coming. She had no idea. And now we are going to tell you exactly what is coming, in the kind of specific detail she never prepared for. If you think you know what prison looks like, the tower, the guard, the surveillance camera mounted at a distance, the Utah State Correctional Facility will correct that assumption immediately. The USCF, which opened in 2022 on the north side of Salt Lake City, runs on what is called a direct supervision model. Officers do not watch inmates from towers or booth windows. They live inside the housing units, in real time, on the floor. The design philosophy is proximity, not distance. The theory being that constant, close human presence changes the calculus of behavior more effectively than surveillance from above. For Kouri Richins specifically, that detail is worth turning over slowly. She built her public life on distance. The camera was always at a remove. The morning show host was always on the other side of a table. The book was text on a page which she controlled. The social media presence was curated, filtered, timed. Every point of contact between Kouri Richins and her audience was a point she managed. The USCF's direct supervision model means that the people responsible for her daily life are not watching from a distance. They are present, constantly. In the same physical space, that is new. She will be classified. Every person entering the USCF goes through a classification process, risk level, housing assignment, program eligibility, that inputs a full picture of the conviction. Aggravated murder, life without parole. What comes out of that process determines whether she is assigned to Dell or Emerald, the two primary housing units, and what her daily movement looks like. Credentials do not move that needle. The paralegal certificate she earned in Summit County Jail does not move that needle. The MBA she completed in custody does not move that needle. The classification system runs on conduct and assessed risk, not on what you studied while you were waiting for trial. She will begin where the classification process places her, and she will work from there. Phone calls. This is the one the people who followed this trial will feel most acutely. Through 4 years in Summit County Jail, Greg Hall, her partner, her primary contact, the man who appears to have been the central relationship of her life through the entire trial period, was in daily contact with her. Phone calls, in-person visits, a sustained, constant presence. At intake into the USCF, that relationship does not transfer on its own terms. Calls are 15 minutes, monitored, recorded. The contact list she can call from is updated once every 6 months. That means if she wants to add someone or change who she is calling, she waits up to 6 months for the cycle to turn. The daily rhythm Greg Hall provided, the voice at the other end of a phone, the person who kept the outside world tethered to her, rebuilds inside those 15-minute windows, or it does not rebuild at all. Visitation is Saturdays and Sundays. Pre-approved visitors only. Anyone with a prior felony conviction cannot visit. All mail she receives is copied before it reaches her. Every letter, every document, every piece of paper that enters her hands has already passed through someone else's. Books must be shipped new, directly from publishers, not from family, not from Amazon, not from a used bookstore, directly from the publisher. She is still pursuing civil litigation against Katie. 3 active cases attempting to access what Eric placed in trust for his sons. That litigation now runs through 15-minute monitored phone calls to attorneys who are working on a clock that resets every 6 months when she updates her contact list. The financial strategy she constructed over years, the insurance policies, the civil cases as leverage, the attempt to access the trust, continues. But it continues from inside a system that was not designed to accommodate it. Ruby Frank is already there. Jody Hildebrand is already there. The USCF has already absorbed its high-profile inmates, already moved past the noise of their arrivals, already settled into the permanent routine that long-term incarceration produces. Kouri Richins arrives into a world that has already moved on without her. And here is what that world will not give her ever again: the ability to perform for an audience she controls. The morning show, the book cover with her face on it, the social media post with the viewer discount code, the planned platform, the bigger project, the sequel she had discussed. Every piece of her public identity was built on the premise that she could curate what the world saw of her. The USCF is the first environment in her adult life designed, from the architecture to the supervision model to the mail policy, to make that impossible. Everything monitored, everything copied, nothing performing for an audience she manages. That is what prison will really be like for Kouri Richins, not for any inmate, for her specifically. But the story is not over, and if you have followed this case, you already know that. So let's talk about what remains open. There is a fraud trial pending. More than 20 charges covering financial crimes committed in 2021, the year before the murder. No trial date has been set. Prosecutors have argued, and the evidence suggests that the financial crimes and the murder were not separate stories. They were parallel tracks of the same desperation. The same woman, the same calculus, the same unraveling. That trial is still coming. There is an appeal. The clock is running. The legal footing is thin. 8 jurors convicted on all 5 counts in 3 hours, but thin is not zero, and appeals exist precisely for thin arguments. It moves slowly. It will move for years. On July 31st, there is a restitution hearing. The insurance companies are involved. Summit County has filed a claim for the cost of her public defense. And there are life insurance policies on her own children, still paying their own premiums, still contested, still unresolved. Judge Morrissey said something from the bench that deserves to be on the record. He named a gap in the protective order statute, a place where the law, as written, did not reach far enough to protect the people who needed it. He named it directly and said the legislature must fill it. That is now a public record. Whether the legislature moves is a different question, but the gap has been named. And then there are the boys. Carter, Ashton, Weston, 13, 11, and 9 years old now, growing up in the home of the people their father trusted with everything he had. Growing up, and this is in their own words, their own statements, submitted to a judge in a courtroom on their father's birthday without fear of her. They appeared 3 times inside this story. In the hallway, outside the locked door, calling for a father who could not answer. In the courtroom, through the voices of their therapists, saying what they needed a judge to hear. And now, in the coda, in the present tense, in the house where they are becoming themselves, they appear one final time. Weston was 5 years old when Eric died. He has spent more than half of his life in the world she created. His statement to the court was clear. Once she is gone, truly gone, behind a door that does not open, he said he will feel happy. He said he will feel safe. He said he will finally be able to trust people. A 9-year-old boy said that to a judge on his father's birthday. And the judge listened, and the gavel came down, and Carter and Ashton and Weston went home to the people their father chose, to a house without her in it, to a life that is, slowly, imperfectly, day by day, becoming theirs. That is where this story ends, not with the prison, not with the sentence, not with her. With 3 boys who told a judge what they needed. And got it.